Taylor. Taylor. Taylor.
What's good, NBA fans? This is your man Dalton representing Ballers Delight, and in this video, I will be tackling two players who I believe have a case to be called the GOAT. Now, this video is going to piss a lot of people off if I don't get two things out of the way right now. First, these players have cases to be called the greatest of all time, but in my view, their cases are not nearly as strong as Michael Jordan's. Jordan, in my opinion, is solidified at the number one spot, and there's a considerable but not huge distance to the rest of the pack. This video is more or less just taking a different perspective at these players' careers, what they did better than Jordan, and how an argument could be made for them. Another thing I need to get out of the way immediately is that I'm not going to be covering LeBron James in this video. I just feel like it's been done to death. It's been talked about everywhere, in the media.
LeBron has more assists, LeBron has more rebounds, LeBron has a higher field goal percentage, LeBron has a higher three-point percentage, LeBron has a higher box score plus minus, LeBron has a higher value over replacement player, LeBron's been to more NBA finals, LeBron has more everything in the playoffs.
Yeah, you've all heard it a million times, and that's not what this video is about. The two players that we'll be looking at have been overlooked in that conversation since the ascension of LeBron and deserve more recognition, as I believe either of these players, as well as LeBron, would be reasonable picks for the title of best ever. Take a look. Hakeem Olajuwon. Hakeem historically has been overlooked, though I have seen more people appreciate the absolute greatness of this man in recent history. Hakeem's case for the best of all time would be simple. He has arguably the best peak of any player ever, he's inarguably a top 5 defensive player in history, and the few times he's had adequate support on his teams, he's had success. To tackle the first point, his peak, I'll show you his 2-year stretch as the best player in the world. And yes, he did only become the best after MJ left, but it's not like they ever met in the playoffs to begin with. And being the second best player in the league behind a prime Michael Jordan isn't exactly anything to be embarrassed about. Hakeem in 1994 had what I consider to be the greatest overall season in history, winning MVP, Defensive Player of the Year, and Finals MVP in the same season. This is the only season where a player has accomplished all three of these things at once. He also took a team with no All-Stars or future Hall of Famers to the championship, which again, nobody else has ever done. There have been players like Rick Barry, Tim Duncan, and Dirk Nowitzki who have carried huge loads and won championships, but Hakeem's was the only one to meet this specific criteria and was also easily the most impressive in doing so. This was due to his defense and the level of competition he faced, along with his teammates being arguably the worst out of any of them. Hakeem led the Rockets in all 5 major statistical categories, as points, rebounds, assists, steals, and blocks for the playoffs, which again, only one other player has ever done, that being LeBron James in 2016. Even LeBron had a 25-a-night scorer and Kyrie on his team, making Hakeem's run just that much more impressive. The competition he faced was great at both his position, outplaying and defending bigs like Charles Barkley, Karl Malone, and Patrick Ewing, and as teams, playing a 56-win Suns team, a 53-win Jazz team, and a 57-win Knicks team who had a historic defense. The next year, in 1995, Hakeem and the Rockets were experiencing inner turmoil due to some players having an issue with the presence of Clyde Drexler. This resulted in a subpar 47 wins for the defending champs. Hakeem, however, would answer all the doubters, having arguably the best playoff run in NBA history, averaging 33 points, 10 rebounds, 5 assists, and 3 blocks a night, while shooting 56% true shooting, and leading his team on both ends of the floor to the only championship in history by a 6th seed. This meant that the competition they faced was going to be tough, which brings me to my next point. The Rockets faced the best competition of any team in a championship run this year. The Rockets beat 4 teams with 57 or more wins. To put that into perspective, only 2 other teams in history have won a championship while facing 4 teams with 50 or more wins. Yet the Rockets pulled this off while facing 4 57-win teams. The craziest part about this playoff run is that the Suns team that they played in the second round won 59 games while struggling with key injuries throughout the season. Kevin Johnson missed nearly half the season, and Barkley missed another 14 games. This team was easily on pace to win 62 plus if they were fully healthy, which means they would have been the only team in history to beat 3 teams with 60 or more wins in any playoff run. That's how good Hakeem's peak was. Hakeem's 1994 and 1995 playoff runs could both easily be considered top 5 playoff runs in history. and Hakeem did it in back-to-back seasons. Hakeem was so good at his peak that I think no matter how you value someone's peak versus their career, this is a huge asset in Hakeem's case for being the greatest ever. Now to address my second point. Let's take a look at just how big the load that Hakeem had to carry on a year-to-year basis was. There are only 2 players who have led their teams in 4 out of the 5 major statistical categories in more than 3 regular seasons. Hakeem had 9 of these, and Kevin Garnett had 7. In these seasons, Kevin Garnett only won 2 playoff series, both coming in 2004 when he made the Western Conference Finals. Hakeem in these seasons went to 3 finals and won 2 championships. That is unbelievable to me that he's one of 2 players that had to carry that type of load, and that he was so much more successful than the other guy. This is why discrediting Hakeem for his first round exits is just unfair. Sure, there were a couple times where he played below his standards and lost, but that is easily balanced out by the times that he did everything possible to carry the team, yet couldn't. For example, in 1987, facing elimination against the Sonics, Hakeem dropped an impossibly good 49 points, 25 rebounds, and 6 blocks while playing 53 minutes in a double overtime loss. His teammates shot just 37% that game. The next year, facing elimination, Hakeem dropped 40 points, 15 rebounds while shooting 67% from the floor, a loss due to his teammates shooting just 34%. And if that wasn't enough to prove to you just how big the load that Hakeem had to carry was, then consider this. In 1985, the Rockets went from 29 wins to 48 wins, 19 more after drafting a rookie Hakeem. Keep in mind that the core was basically identical from the 1984 team. This was a bigger win improvement than even rookie Michael Jordan was able to provide. For the rest of his prime, the Rockets only had a winning record without Hakeem once, in 1991, and even that year they still had a losing record to teams with winning records. The rest of his prime years, they were combined 17 and 43, with Hakeem not playing from 1986 to 1996. In the 1992 season, the Rockets missed the playoffs because Hakeem missed just 12 games, causing his team to go 2-10 in that stretch. This is after a season being on a 47-win pace with Hakeem in the lineup. The only real times the Rockets got support around Hakeem were in 1986 when he had Sampson, and in 1995 and 1996 with Clyde on the team. All the other seasons in his prime, his best teammate was probably Otis Thorpe. Solid 18-10, good defensive player who I would equate to a modern Steven Adams. There's no way he could be the second best player in a championship team. Well, that's until he was in 1994 when Hakeem had the best season ever. In the seasons he did have help, Hakeem went to the finals as a sophomore, beating a prime Showtime Lakers in 5 games, and taking the legendary 1986 Celtics to 6 games. Sampson was good in the playoffs up until the finals, where he'd shoot just 44%, putting up 15 and 10 at night. He'd get into early foul trouble in games 1 and 6 while being ejected in game 5, limiting the amount of time he could be on the floor. Just so you can understand what odds Hakeem was up against in this series, LeBron's best teammate in the 2015 finals, Timothy Mozgov, averaged 14 and 7 on 55% shooting, and the Cavs still stole 2 games. Hakeem also got 2 games with similar production from a teammate, but did it against the 1986 Celtics, who, whether you want to admit it or not, were better than the 2015 Warriors. The other seasons Hakeem had enough help were in 1995, which we discussed, and in 1996. While I do think Hakeem underperformed offensively in these playoffs, it was against the 96 Sonics. George Karl's trap defense and heavy help below the foul line was designed to stop the other team's star player. In that same playoff run, they held Stockton to just 10 points a night while shooting 40%, Hakeem's teammate Clyde Drexler to just 19 a night, Scottie Pippen to just 34% from the field, and most notably Michael Jordan to arguably his worst playoff series ever. The only team to beat the Sonics that year were the 96 Bulls, who by many were called the best team ever. So this is the one time Hakeem came up short with help, but it was still pretty understandable. Hakeem's overall impact, defense, playoff dominance, and peak are all huge reasons you can use to call him the GOAT. Not to mention, he's probably the most versatile player ever. The only thing he couldn't do was shoot threes, and back then centers didn't even need to. So moving on to the next pick, Tim Duncan. Tim Duncan? Really? Yeah, you bet your ass, Tim Duncan. The big fundamentals case for being called the greatest is a compelling one by anyone's standards. Tim Duncan had a rookie season that hasn't been replicated since. He went to the '98 Western Conference Finals and immediately changed what it meant to be a Spur, setting the standard for the soft-spoken, defense-first, hard-working superstar that San Antonio would embrace for the next 20 years. Duncan played his entire career for the Spurs, which meant he had to be in the grueling modern Western Conference for his entire career, competing with great teams like the Chris Webber Kings, Kobe and Shaq's Lakers, Dirk's Mavericks, Nash's Suns, and later on CP3's Clippers and KD and Russ's OKC teams. This conference is often called the best ever, and rightfully so, as it really hasn't been replicated in terms of talent and depth. Something that gets overlooked is just how good Duncan was at matching up with the so-called most dominant ever in Shaquille O'Neal in his prime. The Spurs and Lakers matched up 5 times in the late 90s and early 2000s, and Duncan routinely did as good a job as anyone could on Shaq defensively, while still having to carry the offensive load without a guy like Kobe Bryant by his side. I would say Duncan was better in 3 out of the 5 matchups, not just statistically, but when watching the film as well. Just look at how effective he was on O'Neal in this footage of 2002. Duncan won 5 damn championships as the best player on his team. I don't know if you can say that for anyone outside of Jordan and Russell. I'd argue for Magic as well, but the list ends there. And no, Tony Parker was not better than Duncan in the 2007 run, and it's arguable if he was even the best player in the finals. If you watch this series, you know that San Antonio's game plan was to let LeBron shoot perimeter jumpers while not allowing him penetration. While this strategy was effective, we are talking about LeBron James, so there were plenty of times he did get to the rim, with Duncan being there to stop him more often than not. Duncan also led his team in assists that series, which is crazy to think about he did playing the power forward position. But this brings me to my next point, Duncan's defense. For my money, he's a top 5 defender of all time, and him never winning a Defensive Player of the Year is one of the biggest travesties in NBA history. However, he kind of made up for that by having the most all-defensive team selections in history, and being tied with the second most all-defensive first-team selections ever. The man was on the all-defensive team for 15 damn years, which is just ridiculous. This is also a reason I consider him to be the best player on the 2014 team. Even though Kawhi won Finals MVP, and deservingly so, Duncan, for my money, was still the best player on the team for the whole playoff run due to his defense, leadership, and offense. So for Duncan's case, we have playing in the toughest conference ever, yet still coming out as a 5-time champ and being the best player for all of those runs. On top of that, he was a top defender in the league for the entirety of that dynasty. We also have that he was the man that held the organization down, which really set the foundation for what the Spurs would go on to become. I mean, just look at what happened after he retired. We could never imagine something like the Kawhi fiasco happening with Duncan on the team. One final point I want to bring up about Duncan is just how damn good he was at his peak. From 2001 to 2003, Duncan really didn't have much support as David Robinson was starting to show some age and Ginobili and Parker had just come into the league. During this 3-year stretch, Duncan won 2 MVPs, I would argue he deserved all 3, went to 2 Western Conference Finals, and won a championship carrying the Spurs over Kobe and Shaq's Lakers, Dirk's Mavericks, and Kidd's Nets. Duncan would lead the Spurs in points, rebounds, assists, and blocks for the playoffs, becoming one of 2 big men to lead their team in assists for a championship run. The other being the aforementioned Hakeem Olajuwon. Duncan was a top 10 defender ever, was the foundation for one of the best franchises in sports history, led the team on both ends of the court for 15 years, and won 5 championships in this time as the best player in the team in the most difficult conference ever. He was also historically dominant at his peak. So if you ask me, that's a pretty compelling case to be called the greatest ever. That's going to wrap things up for this video. Hope you guys enjoyed. Comment, like, subscribe. I'll back at your boy.